This video is mostly just for fun, as the scenario we are discussing today is sadly not one that was ever proposed in history. But me and some friends were discussing various unification projects within the Balkans. You know, the region famous for its ethnic stability, and of course, most of the proposals were pretty stupid. So then I thought, but how stupid can we make it? What if we attempted to unify literally every Balkan state into one single nation? Now I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just run through why this would be a stupid idea, before we even discuss the politics of it all, just by seeing how impossible it is to find borders that would satisfy all of these nations. Yugoslavia is step 1, already made up of 6 sub-republics and 2 autonomous regions. There are the Catholic Croats and Slovenes, Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo, while these regions are a complete mess ethnically speaking. Then there are Macedonians, which used to basically be Bulgarians, but Serbia took control over, increasing Serbian and Bulgarian tensions. Kosovans are basically Albanians, but there is no way that Serbia is going to let that happen. Bulgaria and Romania, as well as Hungary and Romania, have border disputes, and there are Hungarians living in northern Serbia too. Finally in Greece, Bulgaria wants Western Thrace, and Macedonia has claims on the region too, which are supported by Serbia and or Bulgaria, depending on the time frame. Oh yeah, and Greece wants parts of Albania. You might imagine that it's difficult to find a workable solution to unify this entire region. Now that is not to say that this could never work. Under the right circumstances and frameworks, multicultural societies can thrive. But in the case of the Balkans, these are some very long-lasting grudges which you'd somehow have to find lasting solutions for. For this to work, a unitary state would likely be much better, as since none of the population groups has a plurality, a shared identity might develop. But in the more likely confederal model that this state would take, I think that these issues would linger rather than disappear, just waiting for a crisis to destroy its fragile unity. Facilitating any form of Balkan unity is extremely difficult. There were, however, some proposals. First was during the struggle for independence against the Ottomans. The idea here was to unify the dispersed peoples fighting for their independence together. While, for the long-term stability of the Union, such an early point would be the best proposal, you can imagine the difficulty in convincing the very nationalistic, newly independent states to again restrict their own autonomy, even voluntarily. After World War I then, there was some talk of an EU-type economic union in the region, mainly proposed by Greece. But the animosity between the states was just too high and it never really went anywhere. This leaves the post-World War II world, where I think we have the best odds. 4 out of the 5 nations commonly included in such a federation were communist by this point. In fact, there were, even in our timeline, unification talks between Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, which failed due to disagreements over Macedonia and Tito's insistence that Bulgaria should be divided in such a union. Still, these negotiations are our best chance at creating a Balkan Union. For this to succeed, we'd need Stalin to, for whatever reason, be a huge fan of creating this Balkan Union. Why he would do this is up for interpretation, but considering the outscaled influence that he held over 3 of the relevant nations, is the only person in history that could single-handedly cause the creation of this union. Perhaps he hopes that by uniting the Balkan, he can consolidate power over Yugoslavia, who would now be outvoted by the 3 nations which Stalin has much closer control over. Besides, it would make Tito dependent on Soviet forces in case the Union faced internal troubles. Alternatively, Stalin could also see this as a great socialist experiment in breaking down nationalist identities in favor of communism. Or he might quite simply think that this unification makes the Balkan more efficient. Perhaps, in terms of a point of departure, we can take the Greek Civil War. Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, once the war turns against the communists, launch a joint invasion of Greece. I highly doubt that the West would allow them to march to Athens, but perhaps they can occupy the northern bits. A crisis is created as the Americans and Soviets come to an agreement to make Greece the latest state divided by Cold War tensions. But this new Greek state is too small, too weak to stand on its own, while Tito had his own designs on the territory as well, hoping to expand northern Macedonia into the south. Stalin attempts to mediate tensions and comes up with an idea. As Bulgaria and Yugoslavia enter their union state, Macedonia is expanded into Greece, and the remaining territory is folded into the Union, with eastern Thrace gaining autonomy within northern Greece. By now, no longer just a southern Slavic union, the state is renamed to the Balkan Federation, as Albania and Romania are added to it too, with Soviet influence on the nation greatly rising. Now, if you want to really go crazy, and I'd like to think we do, we can even turn to the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. As Hungary attempts to break away from the Soviet sphere and is invaded by the Soviets, a decision is made. Why not just add Hungary to the Balkan Federation too? This way, any future Hungarian revolt can be treated as an internal uprising, rather than the Soviets invading a supposedly sovereign nation. As an olive branch, the Romanians allow some autonomy for the Hungarians in Transylvania. The great socialist Balkan Federation is complete. Is any of this realistic? Of course not. But if Stalin somehow lost his mind in 1945, it is possible. Now, for the sake of your attention span, I don't really want to focus too much on the Cold War. While I am sure that this has caused butterfly effects across the world, these are really difficult to pin down, and will mostly be down to subtle differences in politics and economics. This Balkan Federation will continue to be firmly in the Soviet sphere, especially in the east, and don't expect the state to take a strong stand against Moscow like Yugoslavia did in our timeline. The division in Greece would be a tension point between the East and the West, but not one that either side would take to the extreme. It is, however, possible that Turkey is more aggressive against this weaker Greece, but American pressure would mostly prevent full wars between the two. It is also, of course, possible that we have butterflied away the conclusion to the Cold War of our own timeline. But again, this is an effect that is practically unpredictable. So let's instead jump to the point that we've all been waiting for, the fall of communism. As we see Gorbachev announce Soviet reforms, and the Warsaw Pact and then Soviet Union collapses, things could quickly get interesting for the Union, which now lacks its military guarantor, has a collapsing economy, and faces rapidly changing politics. Everyone in the Union could feel it within the water. Something was going to break real fast. The individual nations within the Union would begin to shore up their own positions, as the federal army would swiftly face disrepair as national and local armies are reinforced. Something would have to break, and that something was Yugoslavia. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. Keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. Now, as the most ethnically diverse sub-republic, it only makes sense that it would be the first to go. Besides, Belgrade is likely the official capital. Much like in our own timeline, tensions between the Serbs and Kosovars opens the question of nationalism within the Union. As Serbia takes a harsh stance against the Kosovars, Albania takes the issue up with the rest of the Federation, who denounce Serbian actions. The fragmentation of the Union accelerates when it becomes clear that Serbia will not stop cracking down on Kosovo. This leads to Albania being the first state to officially declare their independence from the Union, and openly supports anti-Serbian forces in Kosovo. Serbia attempts, in vain, to rally the Union against Albania, but finds little support for such a plan. Even worse, Slovenia and Croatia announced their intention to leave Yugoslavia as well. Once again, Serbia requests aid from the other members in dealing with the uprising, and once again, Serbia is ignored. This is generally regarded as the de facto end of the Union. One nation, however, was very clear in their intention to remain in the Union: Northern Greece. While their population was unified behind the idea of reunification into the south, the elites of the north hoped to prevent this for as long as possible, leading to them calling for security guarantees against southern Greece. You won't be surprised to learn that they too were ignored. as even Yugoslavia would refuse to offer support. With tacit American approval, southern Greek forces marched north, as pro-unification protesters captured the capital. As the Greeks reached Thessalonica and announced the reunification of the state, Bulgaria marches into western Thrace, supposedly to protect the minorities there from Greek oppression, starting the low-intensity Greco-Bulgarian War. The Yugoslav Civil War, meanwhile, would be ramping up. Serbia desperately attempts to secure both Croatia and Albania, but in the process only further digs their own grave. Unlike our timeline, where Yugoslavia's neighbors had little justification to intervene, the fact that they were all part of the same nation means that this isn't the case here. As Bosnia too goes up in flames, Serbia is increasingly spread thin, as their military successes are reversed. Even worse, Hungary has announced a temporary occupation of Vojvodina. Macedonia, unwilling to fight Serbia's war, leaves the Union, seeking Bulgarian protection to prevent Greece and Serbia from threatening the new state. This would mark an escalation in the Greco-Bulgarian War. Desperately, Serbia attempts to negotiate a truce, preserving their current borders, but few are interested. Hungary completes their occupation of Vojvodina, while Albania invades Kosovo, and Croatia and Bosniaks push the Serbians out of Bosnia. Montenegro, not directly involved in the current conflicts, silently leaves the Union as well. Throughout this entire conflict, the West is completely dumbfounded. All of this would have happened over the time span of a couple of years, while they were dealing with the collapse of a nuclear power, the reunification of Germany, the founding of the European Union, and the expansion of said union. They were simply unprepared to properly respond to the chaos, before, years too late, enforcing a ceasefire in the region. Serbia is easily the biggest loser in this conflict. Albania would seek to integrate Kosovo. Croatia might seize a portion of Bosnia-Herzegovina, while Hungary temporarily holds on to Vojvodina, until they deem Serbia ready to restore their rule, though many expect that Hungary has no intention to restore the northern, majority Hungarian territories to Serbia. In the south, Macedonia and Bulgaria form a union state, with the intention to unify the economies of the two states and form a joint army against the Greeks. In regards to that war, the West would enforce a ceasefire along the front line. As Greece reintegrates territories seized from Macedonia, Bulgaria announces the creation of the Autonomous Republic of Thrace, clearly a first step towards the creation of a greater Bulgaria. Now, it is important to note that while I have described this potential conflict very matter-of-factly, it would very much be the most destructive conflict in Europe since World War II. In our timeline, about 140,000 people died in the Yugoslav wars, and 4 million more were displaced. Expect that number to be easily doubled, setting the already poor Balkan region back even further due to the chaos of the conflict. Even worse for the region, integration into the European Union or even NATO is now practically impossible. A major prerequisite for integration is to have no outstanding territorial dispute. One of the big reasons why Moldova, Ukraine, or Georgia have failed to join in our timeline. Assuming that the West doesn't make any exceptions, most states in this former federation are definitely unable to join. While Romania could theoretically be a candidate, in practice, because they don't have a border, this couldn't happen without Hungary, meaning they are kept out. While Greece had joined the EU in our timeline during the Cold War, thanks to its violent division in a civil war, they might very well be kept out here. And even if they aren't, their competition with Bulgaria guarantees that Bulgaria itself can never join. Albania is a tough candidate until Serbia accepts the loss of Kosovo, and I don't even need to mention why Serbian candidacy itself is unlikely. The only states in the Balkans likely to succeed in integration with the West are Slovenia and maybe Croatia, depending on how controversial their annexation of Bosnian territory was. For Europe going forward, this has major ramifications. The EU is significantly smaller, and the Balkan is economically weaker and unconnected, remaining far poorer in the long term. On the other hand, For the EU itself, disruptive figures like Orban are kept out of the Union. Also, the Eastern Mediterranean was one of the largest routes for illegal immigration into the EU. This route is possibly much less of a concern in this alternate timeline. Finally, as Russia, the EU and America continue to compete for global influence, the Balkans has the potential to be an extremely fierce source of not just competition, but potentially even wars, as the nations decide on who can better safeguard their interests against their regional rivals. But of course, all of this is just one of many possible scenarios, and very much one of the more worst-case ones. Perhaps I am wrong, and the Balkan Union successfully reforms itself into a state that truly transcends nationalities to bring unity and progress to the Union. Or maybe we should revisit the earlier starting date and explore a Balkan Federation that does indeed unify from the start against the Ottomans. If either of those interest you, leave a comment to let me know, and I might just make a follow-up to this video. For now though, I will thank you all for watching. Consider leaving a like and a comment, as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click the video on top to watch another in this series. If you've already seen it, then I'm sure that the bottom video is great too. Once again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.